Any new insights regarding your conversation around these reasons why money is such a taboo subject in the church? Any new thoughts, anything anyone would like to share from your table conversation? Yes, ma'am.
I would just, for me, the money is private, is key, but not because of a sacredness as much as shame.
Much as what?
Shame.
Shame. Oh, yeah. Well, it's... Actually, I do other things than talk about money from time to time. Actually, I just came out this summer. I finished a book on the atonement and shame. And I'm arguing, traditionally in the church we've talked about how the work of Christ deals with our guilt. What I've tried to do is now bring that to the shame. And actually, again, the transformed imagination, when you start reading the New Testament in terms of shame, holy moly, it just all opens up in a new way. I don't say a lot about money, but money's connection, of course, is its status. I mean, status, honor, and shame is about status, how we measure up. You need another person to feel ashamed. You can feel guilty on your own, but you need somebody else to feel ashamed. And so with money, of course, as being the primary measurement, I'm going to say a word about that here probably, maybe before lunch, but after lunch, thank you for bringing this up, because this really, I think, hits on one of the real secrets of why it's private. The privacy, just like anything dealing with shame, is we do not want this known. This is too important, and all of us are going, I shouldn't say all of us, but a lot of us, not us in this room, but everybody else out there, is we want to project an image. We want to be looked well upon. I mean, listen, we bear the image of Jesus Christ. It is natural for us to be honored. All right? But that gets all twisted and warped, with all of our stuff. So the shame thing has to do, and money's problem in one sense is it makes too much sense. It's an easy way to measure. Its problem is it wants to measure things that doesn't have any business measuring. That is our value as human beings. But that doesn't stop us from doing it. And so we do it about others and we do it about ourselves. Well, is it any wonder then we don't talk openly about this? Because we're terrified of being found out. Maybe you don't even want to share your tax returns. That's all I'm going to say about that. What are you laughing at? I'm not even sure what's going on. I have a huge amount of money in the bank, though. I want to make sure you know that. Okay, that's it. That's all. That's all until the next one, I promise. But the point, and I do have one, is that we do, and most of it is unconscious. But if this is the primary way that culture says you are a person of value or not, is it any wonder? Is it any wonder? Now, I'm putting a marker down here. I'll give you the scriptures here in a little while. But what if, okay, that's a cultural marker. That's the way we measure things culturally. But what if we've heard a story about another way that value comes to us? And what if actually some of us have been called to tell others that story? Well then, isn't it wise that we ought to be able to address that conflicting story in the light of this other story? As I said earlier, as Father Wesley has taught us and others along the way, there's not a human being who enters this world untouched by the love of God, the grace of Jesus Christ. And whether you have money or not have money, that can't be changed. So, isn't that good news, as we say? So, if you never address these things, how do you really get to the heart of what keeps people up at night? Or, as I said, what worries them? Again, it's not just folks out there that worries people in the church because they've never really heard it brought in that way that for many of them really counts. Okay, it's important. It's good. Money is a wonderful tool, but it doesn't give you value. That's already taken care of. Okay, so thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to preach, and to try to sell my book. It's called The Face of Forgiveness: A Pastoral Theology of Shame and Redemption, InterVarsity Press. And again, the face, because the face, shame, we drop our faces. That's the shame response. You don't want to be seen. It's, in the story of the fall, Adam and Eve drop their visages, they look down, is that Christ, the face of Jesus Christ, who in taking our shame on the cross, stripped naked, talk about a shaming death, stripped naked for all to see, in order to die as you're losing all of your bodily functions before a crowd of people. Not a good way to go. Purposeful. The Roman act of crucifixion is purposeful. So to deal with our shame, so the face of Jesus Christ is that he reveals to us the true face of God, who loves us and who bears our shame as well as our guilt. So anyway, that's what I'm doing with that. Okay. So thank you. Thank you for that opportunity. No extra charge. Okay, well, anything else from the group? But thank you. That was the first response, wasn't it? Okay, it'll pick up from here. Anyone else on your table conversations?
I mean, one of the great secrets of people and money, and I serve in an affluent area, is like where you invest your money. And I'll never forget it into eternity when we were, one of the wealthiest families, they had blown their money on a false Ponzi scheme. Mm-hmm. They went from being the wealthiest family in the church to winning the bottom. And I was serving with the Senior Pastor Joe DePaulo. And that's where sacrament came. That was the day for communion, that first Sunday in January of 2009. And of course the power of the Eucharist, because there's nothing you could say, but you could just feel the palpable, there were a whole, and other people were involved too in the community, but it was all out in the open, this naked.
Right, yeah.
We gave our money away to this criminal clown. We were foolish with our money.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's what greater sin? I mean, what greater, thing?
And then the church had partly backed one of those funds too. So in that moment, when I decided, you know what, on paper I should have been moving along during the provisional period or something, but I stayed at Wayne even longer, and we're just finishing up. But
Okay.
That lack, in that pity of it, I think now people had, maybe somebody had an inkling that maybe this wasn't totally great, but you were afraid to talk about it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we usually, and again, most churches, they do have people who have a financial background, okay? And they become, the resident experts. And, and again, like me in that first ad board meeting, I didn't want to ask a stupid question. But, I do think culturally, if you gain more openness in talking about money in the church, that starts to change everything. Again, it's not always questioning, because thanks be to God, there are people who do come and have tremendous abilities and knowledge that can be helpful organizationally. But that doesn't mean that everyone else just shuts up and, never says or does anything. Okay, thanks. Any one or two more? Any other aspects of your conversation reflecting this that you'd like to bring up?
Well, I thought I was the only person in the whole room that would have a lack of trust in organizations, but it seems that's pretty common.
Lack of trust, yeah.
Pretty common at our
Yeah.
table and probably pretty common in the room. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
actually feel better that my lack of trust is being cynical about the world.
Misery loves company. Yes, exactly. Right. Yeah. Do you get that? Have you heard that either of yourself or you heard that from folks in the church? Yeah. Apportionments. What are they doing with our money? What are they doing with our money? Oh, you mean the annual conference, the basic part of the United Methodist Church, of which the local church is an extension of the ministry of the annual conference? Is that what you're asking? No, that's not what they're asking, because that's not what their reality is. What are they doing with our money? Right. Yeah.
Going along with Chris, and it doesn't say that it wasn't part of our conversation, but sometimes a lack of trust is also in our neighbor. Whenever we have several individuals or families in the church that on a community level are known to be some of the wealthiest in the community, but yet somehow your congregation struggles to meet its budget. Now there's a lack of trust.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it builds and builds upon itself.
This just came to my mind from something just said, but within the denomination and within the apportionments, they are severely underpaid,
Right.
including direct bills.
Mhm.
And the excuse most churches will give is no money left after our two main expenses,
Right.
the pastor and the church.
Right.
So we have no money left to pay our health insurance, our benefits, our apportionment.
Right. No money left. Yeah. The vision of scarcity. Yeah.
That's a church thing.
Oh, I know. Yeah,
a
it's not
constituency
individuals. Yeah.
thing.
Of course, churches are made up of
Yeah.
individuals with visions of scarcity. Right. Yeah.
In our group, we found that there were two things that actually mirrored each other. One was that mindset of scarcity, and the other is the overwhelming, crushing debt that we as clergy have.
Yeah.
So that scarcity mindset is in both areas. You may have it, but you feel like you gotta hold on to it because you don't know when you might have it. Or you don't have it, so you gotta live hand to mouth,
Right.
with the thought that when you get it, you've gotta keep it because you might not have it again
Right.
in the next year or two.
Right. Yep. They go together. Yep. Ken?
You talked about almost at any level of giving, there's a tension between my generosity and my being grasped by the consumer society. And sort of maybe concluded that if you don't have that tension, then you're not paying attention. If you do
Right.
have attention, maybe that's a sign of the disciple.
Yeah. We're going to talk. We're going to spend a little time talking about Wesley's sermon. That's right at the heart of it. And so we'll chat a little bit about that at that point. What do I actually need, and what is the purpose in gaining? Yeah. Anything else? I got to tell you, and we'll say more of this. I don't know what on earth John Wesley would do if you plopped him right down here in the middle of our thing. I mean, he'd have a conniption. He would just.
He'd have a credit card.
Yeah.
But no money balance.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that a little bit. All right. Well, I think hopefully then we've established the case that culturally we tend to be very quiet about money. On the sacred nature, one of the, and I quoted in the book, but one of the best summary statements I've ever heard of that about the sacredness of money comes from the French sociologist, kind of / philosopher / theologian, Jacques Ellul, E-L-L-U-L. And Ellul says in Western society, because again, not all cultures have the same hesitancy about money talk. This is particular to us. Ellul says, well, actually there's a fairly straightforward reason for why Western people are so hesitant to talk about money. He says, actually, it's simply a matter of anthropology. It's a very human quality that when one finds oneself in the presence of one's God, the first thing you do is to become silent. That is that very uncomfortable moment of holding your wallet out and realizing how important it is, and then the anxiety produced by actually letting someone else, take your household God away from you. It's pretty telling. I mean, again, it's obviously hyperbole, but maybe not all that much. If we're looking to God to preserve us, if we're looking to God to save us, if we're looking to God to sustain us, maybe not all that much hyperbole. Go ahead, one more thing.
And along those lines, I would say into my 6th or 7th year serving in ministry, I found myself uncomfortable but not really sure where to go with the conversation. That if the apex of our Protestant worship is the preached sermon, if not the second apex and maybe the more complete one is that the pastor literally holds the offering plate up. No, and I'm very serious
Yeah.
because I mean, like, when I think about having young kids or having young kids, you're saying that they have nothing to offer before God, because the only way that in many of our churches we offer ourselves is in what we hide in those envelopes. And we refuse to put our names even on the front of them. We have to have it like
Numbers.
coded by numbers.
Right.
and,
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's interesting,
And
isn't
I've not really known what to do with that.
Yeah.
Because I think it is such a common practice
Yeah.
so far that I don't feel like I've seen very good cultural alternatives or participated in
Yeah.
significant cultural alternatives to.
Right. Well, I think, let me respond to that. I think the answer to that is to start having a different conversation. And I think, again, I know you have to be real careful what you do before the table and lifting the money up. On the other hand, I think a good question would be something like this: is what would it actually mean if we really were presenting ourselves? What would that actually mean? I mean, again, obviously not the entirety of ourselves is in that plate, but what is this a sign of? Is it a sign of our willingness to be used completely? Is it a sign, or a lot of times, are we tipping, the preacher? Is it is it about? We'll talk about rational reasons for giving. I mean, is it simply a bad habit? I've given $5 a week, since I was 12, and it was good enough when I was not 12 but 20, and it's good enough when I was 20. It's good enough now. What does that mean? I think liturgically it could still be a very important act if what was in that really did mean something about completely being sold out to God. And then as a result of that, our neighbors. Okay, so I think it could be an important thing, but I hear you. Let me move us on, because it's almost time for break. And I want to say real briefly a couple things, because here's our basic problem. Unlike us culturally, and our hesitancy to speak about money, the Bible just won't shut up about it. So that's kind of the dilemma that we find ourselves in, those of us who particularly have been asked to say a word about the Bible. Matter of fact, the Bible has so much to say. What I do in the book, and just I'm going to do real briefly here for you, is talk about in three areas. Really, I think most of the conversation in the Scripture can be thought of in these three basic areas. And the first one we may find a little off-putting at first. It may worry us a tad. It may sound even a little prosperity gospelish. So I hear that. I know that. It's not, though. Okay, and I'll try to line out where it is. But there is no doubt in the First Testament, Old Testament, Hebrew Bible, whatever language you're comfortable with there is no doubt that a part of the blessing of the people of God is in material terms. There is a deep and profound connection between God caring for the people and explicitly saying, as you are my people, I will provide for you. I will bless you. And again, not just bless you, I will make you be seen. I will take you to a land flowing with milk and honey. You're going to be rich. People are going to marvel at the wealth of Israel because of me. Okay. So, like I said, I know that can be turned and perverted, and I'll say a word about that in a moment, but that does not mean it's not there. Okay? All right. So, one of the great old Sunday school stories that kind of is the epitome of this is when the Queen of Sheba visits Solomon, and she's just marveling at the temple and marveling, what a cool house you got here, Solomon. This is really something. And she comes to this, and again, this gets to the purpose of the material blessing. She comes and says words to this effect: having noticed the wealth and opulence of Solomonic Jerusalem, she says, surely the God of Israel must be the true God. So the purpose of material blessing isn't so that we can have a bunch of stuff. It's that people who do not know the God of Israel might come to realize that God really does have the power to do what God promises to do. Okay? It's a witness to the God. So I just was talking to a group of Methodist preachers over this weekend, last weekend, and I had never thought about this, but I want to call this little section, so, okay, on material blessing is, okay, let's call this God's gift acceptance policy. And I'm going to say more. Now, you will, at some point, Andy, they'll talk about gift acceptance policies, I assume. Okay. Well, let's see, in the First Testament, this is God's gift acceptance policy. That is, God rains down, pennies from heaven. God gives money. God does not give money, but God provides blessing. The people prosper. Sometimes. So here's the thing, though. The material blessing is located within the covenant. Okay? And so here comes the gift acceptance policy. If, Israel, you accept the material blessing, then here is my expectation. Okay. So God puts restrictions on the gift. You'll hear more about that at some point too. Donors can restrict their gifts. This happens all the time whenever somebody writes a memo in a check for the building program, for the youth trip. They have restricted the use of that money. Now, should you use it for another purpose? Well, don't use it for another purpose. That's not a good thing. And it's one way of seeing what unfolds in Israel's history is they insist on ignoring God's restrictions placed upon the gift. And what they ignore most offensively is when God blesses material, the primary proviso is it's so that others will come to know me, they'll know the true God, and it's so that the poor in the land shall be cared for. So that introduces all these weirdo agricultural practices that in one sense make no sense whatsoever in a sterile land like Israel, in our terms. You're not dealing with Iowa, okay? This is a place where it's hard to grow things. So the idea of when you harvest, don't take it all, what are you talking about? And God says, I'm glad you asked. I'm talking about allowing the gleaners, those who do not have, to have. Because this is my purpose. I'm giving this to you so that you can help others. Okay? And people will come to realize that I can do what I say I can do. Okay? They'll know that I'm the true God. Okay, gift acceptance policies, the restrictions placed on that. There's another proviso, though, too, and this is what separates us out from prosperity gospel. God is not a vending machine. God makes covenant. God has purpose. Unlike us, God doesn't always go around saying, it's a different day, what do I do today? There's purpose, there is consistency, there's grace. And not being a vending machine, what that means is that insofar as material blessing is only one small aspect of what it means to be in covenant with God, it doesn't mean that there's any guarantee that you have wealth. Okay? God's not a vending machine. You don't put your $5 in and get 20 back. So what you have is, it's a remarkable thing, the wisdom literature in the Old Testament. So you got the Psalms. We're Americans. I think everyone's an American in here, or we live all in America. We're akin to the culture. There's something about the American DNA that likes this whole sense. It goes back to, up the road here in Philadelphia, it goes back to old Ben Franklin. The adages of Poor Richard. The thinking of, a good day's work is its own is rewarding. Is you work hard, you prosper. You don't work hard, you don't prosper. Well, the Proverbs say things similar to that. There's an awful lot of going after the slothful in the Proverbs. The person who doesn't care enough to work. That's a problem. So you got all that, we're American, we like the Proverbs. That makes sense to us, we get it, I like it. Good deal. Preach it, preacher. It's good words. Turn the page, or actually go before it, back a little bit. You get the book of Job. So right there in the part of Scripture we call the wisdom literature, you have the deconstruction of the book of Proverbs. Because there's poor old Job who didn't get to read the first chapter of his book like we did, who has done exactly what God said. I mean, part of Job's complaint, I did care for the poor. My wealth was used to take care of those who did not have. What's going on here? Okay? And then Job's friends show up to ask Job, well, have you read the book of Proverbs, Job? Because obviously there must be something wrong, some unexamined, some unknown sin, some unwillingness to repent. And there, right in our wisdom literature, is the book of Job that reminds us sometimes the righteous prosper and sometimes they suffer. Because, as Job finds out before the epilogue, where he gets double back, we like that part. Before the epilogue, Job is content. And he's content in a very odd way. Because, he's always been complaining the whole way through about his day in court. He wants to be heard. He's got this case. He knows the way it's supposed to work. You're prospered and you care for others and it's supposed to keep going. But it doesn't. He loses everything. So he wants his day in court. And lo and behold, God shows up, right? And hasn't apparently heard, though, that the way this is supposed to work, because he starts peppering Job with questions.
Who are you?
Yeah, who are you? Where were you? By the way, where were you? And again, the wonderful thing there is it turns out that Job really wasn't primarily interested in getting his stuff back because he was a righteous man, but he wanted to know that God was there. And so no answers whatsoever. And having girded his loins and asked to answer his questions, no answers. But what we get is Job saying, I have spoken of things too wonderful for me. Therefore I repent. Okay? No stuff. But covenant is there. God is still there. And that's, in the end, what the Scripture wants us to get, I think. Okay, so, provisos, God's gift acceptance policy, material blessing, but expectations, gift acceptance policy. It's meant that others will come to know who I am. It's meant to be shared, and it ain't ipso facto. It's not magic. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not, because it's not the end. It's not the goal. And we're going to take about a 15-minute break, and then we're going to come back. We're going to talk about Father Wesley and the goal of this. Thank you. All right, thank you. What I'd like to do is I mentioned it last night. I'd like to take a little time to let you around the tables here for a few minutes have a little bit of conversation about John Wesley's sermon, The Use of Money. I think you had access to that. I'm hoping that at least some folks around the table had opportunity to read it. How many had read it prior to this? All right. Doesn't get any easier, does it? Yeah. Let me make a couple comments. And in the book, I don't say I'm critical of Wesley, but what's that? You can't say that out. Well, I just did. Actually, I wrote it down. But let me give a context for what I say. Is Wesley is, of course, this is the sermon that, if you know anything about what Wesley says about money, it's here. This is what he's famous for. That is that the advice he gives to the Methodists is gain all you can, save all you can, give all you can. in the standard sermons, there's a couple of other sermons, the danger of riches and the increasing danger of riches, words to that effect. So you're getting the gist of it? Actually, the last published sermon on Wesley, and I'm not sure if it's the increasing problem of riches or the danger of riches, he says in there, as an aside, there's almost kind of a tragic, not tragic, but that's kind of a sad sense to it. It's the old man, he's coming down to the end of his ministry, and he says that he can count on one hand the Methodists who took his full counsel on money. That is, they earned, they gained, and they saved, but he was not seeing the giving. A couple observations on that. I think probably the early Methodists, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, right? Okay, thank you. I'll pause now for the laughter to ensue. But you're laughing inside where it counts. But the other thing too was, I guess what it makes you realize is that we have a long Methodist tradition of not listening to John Wesley. What? What? Yeah, I know. So come Sunday, you can say, folks, I got news for you. I don't know if it's good news. I got news for you. Turns out you are traditional Methodists. Don't let anybody tell you that you're liberal or avant-garde. You are traditional Methodists because you don't give much better than the first ones did, according to John Wesley. Now, I want to make two more observations, and I want you to have kind of a conversation around it. And I'm probably, all I can tell you is what I think. John Wesley, of course, was a very interesting person. And, I'm not so sure Wesley, fit any better into the 18th century than he would in the 21st century, as far as most folks. One thing that's important to know with what Wesley, the reason we're Methodists, the reason we're called Methodists, is because of the very precision of that which is necessary, in Wesley's term, is how one responds to the overtures of God, to grace. And the expectation is we must do things to respond. Okay. And the precision in which Wesley had, and the unbelievable detail that Wesley was capable of, both organizationally but in the self-examination of his life. Wesley didn't have much time for fun. Wesley really had no time for fun. Remember, if you're an elder, one of the things you promised was you would not fiddle around your time. I don't think those are the exact words, but you know what I'm saying. What are the exact words about our... We will not trifle. John Wesley was not a trifler. And John Wesley would have been an exceptional accountant. That's a good thing, right? Yes, exactly. It's a good thing. Because he kept track. John Wesley, the treasurer of the church, would never have had to ask Wesley a second time for his receipts. He'd have had them. A couple things on Wesley and money. There's any number of things. First off, he is really dealing in so many with the early Methodists of people of a level of poverty that probably most of us have never seen nor ever will see. He's deadly serious about the simple reality that there is a handful of people who, because of their abundance, there are children starving to death in the streets of London. And he knows there's a connection, and he knows that God has a gift acceptance policy, and he wants people not to go to hell. There it is in a nutshell. So he's deadly serious about the use of money. The other thing, too, is in spite of what maybe sounds harsh to our ears, it's important that you know this. There's a wonderful story told about Father John. He was at a dinner, and there were some wealthy people there, and somebody knew, because Wesley flat out says is this idea of adornment. You got a ring on your finger, that means somebody's going hungry. There's in Wesley's mind, there's a direct relationship to us having things we don't need and people not having enough. Okay, direct. Wesley's sitting there, this fellow who knows this, and he's not a very nice person, probably a Methodist, takes a woman's hand who's sitting there with a nice ring on her finger and puts it in front of Wesley's face and says, "What do you think about this, Reverend Wesley?" And Wesley's response was, "It's a lovely hand." So, he writes and preaches this and he means this, but when he's dealing with individuals, he's not a finger shaker. He's a person who wants people to believe in the reality of Jesus Christ and to be transformed as a result. So keep that in mind, that image of "it's a lovely hand," as we read some of the tough things. Okay. So I want to put this in front of you then. Have a conversation about this. John Wesley, good accountant that he was, bookkeeper, you know the story is that as far as cash in the bank, there are 6 one-pound notes left when he dies. Those are given to 6 poor men to carry his body to the grave. So Wesley goes into the earth, the account is closed. That's what John Wesley means by "give all you can." Let that sink in. That's really what he means by "give all you can." He does not see that as a special vocation for himself. That's really what he means by "give all you can." I don't think it ever crossed John Wesley's mind that when he said he could count on one hand the Methodists who took his full counsel, that maybe that was a standard that was just really kind of beyond where a lot of folks would be or could be. That actual to the penny and done. So I want to put that out there. Okay, so then what do we do with this as United Methodists? What we could do is what Methodists have always done, we've ignored it. We've just really flat out ignored it. And I do think, and I say this in the book, that I think because it's such a hard saying, that the tradition among Methodists is don't pay any attention to it and we'll just figure it out. The problem is then that means that's a part of our silence as Methodists. We've never really had any significant tradition of gain, save, give, if by giving it means that to the penny everything is given away that you didn't need. And what you of course, one pair of shoes, wear them out, and that's how you know it's time for another pair of shoes. That's Wesley's understanding of this. Okay. So I'm just kind of letting this wind out here as the difficulty of this so we can have a conversation. Are there principles here? Because I do think there are, but I want you to talk about it. I'll say a little bit, but I want you to talk about it. What can we take from this? What is there in this? What's the word for us in Wesley's sermon? Okay. Because as I said, the tradition is, ooh, holy cow, really? That's what you mean? Yeah, that's what he meant. So what's the word for us? So have a conversation about that. What's the word for you here? And maybe this is, it's great. Maybe this is good. This is the challenge you've been looking for all your life. But what's the word for you? All right, let's come back here. We're going to keep talking about him, but let's have a group conversation here, the large group. I'm glad there's a conversation going on there. What's the word for you? What's Wesley's word for you from this text? Are you going on to perfection here? Do you expect to be made perfect in this lifetime? What's the word for you? You are good Methodists. This is pretty much it. Yeah.
Don't be wasteful. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, don't be wasteful.
Don't be wasteful, right. He was not wasteful.
Something that we didn't discuss this, but he opens up kind of early on saying it is of the highest importance that we figure out that we know how to employ this talent, how best to employ this talent. And that if you look through his entire sermon, he doesn't see it in terms of family relationships. He doesn't see it as his concern is this. His concern is this is what you're given. You got to use it right.
Right.
It's a tool.
Right.
Positive, negative. Just you got to employ it.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's right. Right. Yes, sir.
I was intrigued by his discussion of what to do with the money when you pass away,
Mhm.
and we're focusing on give all you can, but we're forgetting to save all you can.
Mhm.
And we are very bad as a denomination of saving for a proper, moderate retirement. And then what do you do with your 401k when you pass away? Do you leave it to the wasteful kids? Do you leave it to the church? Well, so that save all you can piece, we want to keep that in our minds as well as the gift.
Yeah.
Because he balanced the sermon.
Right. Well, the 401k you don't want to leave to the kids because there's a tax liability associated with that. So, but I don't think that's really Wesley's point there. But yeah, and actually, I think Wesley's word there, in spite of you're just going to make them awful if you give them money, is a good one, because I do think there's sort of a mindset that no, you have to leave everything to your heirs. Well, I don't know if that's the case, and that's a good conversation when Jack and others talk about planned giving. Are we willing to challenge people of means? And again, we're not talking about super wealthy people. We're talking about middle class folks who have made a good living. There's money that's left. Is it appropriate? I mean, I think Father Wesley does have a word there. Is it right that all goes to children? Are there other things that God would have you do with money? Approximately, and sometimes I know it's hard for us to believe, but again, we're talking about average middle-class folks. Most of our assets, the vast majority of our assets, are not liquid. They're not the cash that we have available to us. So, I think some statistics say 90% of our actual financial value, monetary value, is not liquid. It's not something that you quickly get your hands on. It's homes, it's all the stuff you have in your house, it's collections, cars, what have you. But almost 95% of money given to the church comes strictly from liquid assets. So there is a lot of room for talking about planned giving, and a lot of ability that could be given, and I do think actually you got a word from Wesley there, that you should be thinking about this in a way that it's not just that you have done your part and you gave maybe even a percentage, maybe even a good percentage of this, that there isn't other things that Christ would call us to give. And I don't just mean to the local church, but wherever, that you've both saved. Because when he talks about saving, it's to care for your family. And part of that is, I can't pay for all your kids. You die, you're out there, particularly the circuit riders. A third of them are dead before they're 30. First off, don't get married. That was the first word. But if you do, be careful, because the book concern, that's why you get the check at the annual conference, is to take care of the widows and the orphans of the first preachers. So there's a deep concern, but somebody's got to take care of them, and we'll do it if you don't, but he's challenging them also to save enough to care for their own children. But that's the saving. But then, having provided, you should be giving that now. Yes, ma'am.
We noticed that throughout the sermon, Wesley focused, gives, or gains, save, and give, but all with the awareness that we should never do those things at the expense of life and the abundant life that God promises.
Right.
us.
Yeah.
And the sentence here that really stood out to me is he said, "You render unto God the things that are God's, not only by what you give to the poor, but also by that which you expend in providing the things needful for yourself and your household."
Right.
And so my lingering question, which I suspect you can't answer right now,
Good.
is how do we define what is needful?
Yeah.
So that we can be faithful.
Right, that's exceptional. I couldn't say it better myself. That's the word, and I think what we have is because we have Wesley's example, which is such a stringent one. Well, then what do we do? And I think most of us have felt like there really is no guidance. So it's Israel your tents. Everybody just do the best you can, and then we never talk about it. So it turns out we don't do very well. And again, part of this whole thing of silence in church is exact. Tell me your name. Carissa, is that's the conversation people of faith should be having with one another. And I think that's part of what you know, one of the great things about what you're doing and the way the FLA does this is you're doing a real Methodist thing. You are together, having a conversation, maybe at times a painful one, but you're watching over one another in love. Are we progressing here? Are we going on here together? Because you know, if there ain't nobody checking, that's one thing, but if someone is, that's another thing. And so this is a really good United Methodist thing you're doing here too. But that's exactly the kind of conversation. Okay, so what does this mean then? What does adequately provide? What's you know, Wesley's a good word here about overworking, destroying yourself in the gaining. Well, we got folks in our churches that are doing just that. Back here. Yeah, including us.
It does talk about gaining at the expense of overwork. I wrote in the margin, fundraiser fatigue for a local church, because we do have folks that are literally exhausted for such little gain.
Right.
Sometimes it's easier to answer not so much what's needful, that is the, but sometimes it is easier to answer what we need not to be doing. And I think we can identify those sometimes even better.
Right, right. Very true, very true.
And to add on to what the last two comments, it says, at the expense of our health. And even though we're living longer, there's a lot of things that are at the expense of our health in the attempt to gain. Clergy fatigue and working longer and working harder, that becomes that for this much.
Well, and again, how about our emotional health? You know, the anxiety that haunts, you know, the minutes. I had a cartoon I kept on my desk for years. It's kind of one of these Wall Street Journal cartoons, and it's two guys. It's, you know, typical cartoonist vision of heaven. They're standing on a cloud, looking at each other. They look like, you know, the caricature of successful business, you know, men. And the one guy says to the other guy, "I still worry about money." They're in heaven. I may just not try again. So okay, back to Wesley. But so our health. So that this ongoing kind of buzz behind life of pursuit. You know, when do you know you have enough? You don't. You know, it's the question of Rockefeller. What do you need? What do you want? More? You know, one nickel more. That's the pursuit. It's just this. There's some studies that show that regardless of one's financial assets, that most folks think that if they had 20% more, that would be sufficient. So the person making $20,000, 20% more. The person making $500,000, 20% more, and then they would be satisfied. What's wrong with that picture? Yeah, there's some. What's that?
Just give everybody a raise.
Exactly right. It'll all then exactly
Then they want 20% of that because.
Well, sure. Yeah. There's the, and again, there's inequities. I recognize that, but there's also a human dimension that we are not prone to feeling satisfied. How about that? Yeah.
Well, there was another study that said, does money lead to happiness? And I think a study said being poor leads to suffering and unhappiness. And so more money meant a better level of happiness and welfare up to a certain point. And past that point, it made no appreciable difference. But you needed enough to not be dying.
Yeah. Right. Other things from Wesley. Yep. Back. Go ahead then. Yeah.
I was just going to respond to Carissa's comment about what is the needful thing. I think that Wesley does give a really interesting matrix of questions we can ask ourselves as we're preparing to spend money about, am I acting according to my character? Am I acting as a steward of the Lord's goods? Am I doing this in obedience to His word? Can I say this is a sacrifice to God through Jesus Christ? When we talk about the conversations in our congregations, these would be awesome questions for small groups.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you know, we do, I think in probably some of your churches, we kind of sort of inch up to that a little bit around Christmas time, because it can become such an orgy of spending and just, buying stuff that nobody wants, certainly doesn't need. But, we don't have to do it just at our annual consumptorama at the end of the year. But no, I think I think those are questions. I think we probably would answer them a little bit differently than what John would answer them, but that's okay. That's all right. But I agree completely. Yeah, with that. Do you have something too?
I find in the conversation, in some of the directions Wesley goes, helpful criteria, helpful conversation. Where personally I bump into things is his restrictive, almost excessive method can just suck the grace out of a theology that I love, the grace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it's finding that balance,
Yeah.
which comes back to Rebecca's observation about his questions for
Right.
me, comes back to principles of, not at the expense of health,
Right.
and having the conversations about what is needful.
Yeah.
I mean, whether it's our kids' inheritance
Right.
as a norm, or even things we don't need.
Yeah. That's an excellent point. He's well, and again, that's one reason why I tell the story about the woman's hand. Is he's an ascetic. I mean, this is a guy made for a monastery if there ever was one. Yeah. What's that? Well, that didn't go too well. The marriage. Yeah. Yeah. But in one sense, in spite of that, though, there is grace. That's the thing. I guess that's the point I wanted to make. Is there's this hard saying, but in conversation with other human beings, there's this generosity of not just of whatever financial, but of spirit that really does want to begin where people are, and yet there's this edge. Now, part of it too is the father spent time in debtor's jail, so you don't have to have a degree in psychology to see that, in spite of if ever there was a person who believed in the abundance of God, it was John Wesley. And particularly when our focus on being made perfect, of sanctification, an abundance of grace that can do remarkable things that no one believed in his context could happen. An expectation, therefore, based on what God wants to do in our lives. Okay. But at the same time, there is a scarcity, I think, particularly when it comes to money, and particularly when it comes to the use of time, that I don't think is a good example. And I think that's just like all of us. There's something, in spite of this overall vision, there's still these pieces that inform it. I'm doing a paper on C.S. Lewis this weekend at a thing in Michigan, and talking about him and his generosity. A very generous man, but he admits at one point, I'm still terrified of losing it all. Lewis, he becomes famous, particularly when the Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe books start being published. He answered every letter written to him. Personally. He spent hours each day giving his time, when he could have been doing any number of other things, but really felt a responsibility and a generosity of spirit. But even at the same, he gave away every religious book. All the royalties were given away. So he gave millions of pounds away in his own life, and then the foundation is set up that continues to give money away from the royalties from the books that he wrote. I mean, we're talking, gazillions of books being sold still. So amazing man of generosity, but he admits himself I'm still afraid that it might all go away. So, the saints, I guess what I'm saying, the saints in our midst are still haunted by the same sorts of things that maybe you and I deal with too. Okay, one or two last comments. One more thing.
But I think context for John Wesley is important too. And back in England, at his time, the poor there were no safety nets.
Nothing. Nothing.
There was nothing, and the poor were destitute.
Right.
And I would argue that the church today, at least in America, often ignores some of the same conditions going on in the inner cities, going on with drugs in the streets, that he would have responded to. So while he may have been an aesthetic, he was responding to very real needs that today we just sort of look the other way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, it's absolutely, yeah, and again, he didn't belong in a monastery because he was a person of the people, and right, no, that's true. Back here?
Probably don't want to go into this conversation, but a tension that I feel heavy a lot is, the notion that because you're a person of faith, you should be able to live with less.
Uh-huh.
And so churches believe their pastors should be able to live with less. And parsonages are maintained.
Mm-hmm.
And so then as the person living in the parsonage, the tension between living modestly and being a role model for that in every way imaginable. And so what do you say when your parsonage is not suitable?
Right.
Or not healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you do that? Because you are the person that's supposed to be modeling living within your, and so forth. But how do you express that there are also needs that are not being cared for?
Sure.
It's just a very weird.
Oh, it's a tough thing. Well, again, I'm an elder. We're pastors, but we're not designated Christians. I mean, we're not the ones who are supposed to be actually doing this, and you guys just marvel at our piety as we pass through life. We're Methodists, which meant, remember too our beginnings. 1784. I think there are actually 12 clergy for the entire eastern seaboard. You should know that better than I do, because this is your neck of the woods where it all begins. If I remember the history correctly, 12 or 14. They send 2 away as missionaries, one to the Caribbean and one to Canada, because they were overstaffed, they felt. So 10 or 12 writers for the entirety of the eastern seaboard. There was something else obviously going on that kept Methodism alive than the quarterly times you'd see the preacher come riding up. We're the last denomination where the laity ought to be thinking that somehow they get a pass. Because if ever there was a denomination built by the laity, it's us. So you got that going for you. Now, does it make it easy? Of course not. But we do have the tradition that says we are sent, we are appointed to these places to help you be a church. And we are supposed to do our part because, as I said last night, unfortunately, our own sanctification is going on before a watching church, or lack thereof. But that doesn't mean we're the only ones. And so it's a matter of raising the expectations that we are neither to be treated better nor less than as clergy, but I'm here to remind you, you're here to remind me of our complete and desperate need for grace, and at the same time, the promise and abundance of the way in which God provides it for us. But I get you. When it comes right down to the house you're living in, the first parsonage, Jan, I moved in a very wealthy church. But the church, the house had sat empty for a year. Remember, Jan? Jan remembers very well. We had our first child in that house. There was black mold in the basement. And I tell you, it was my first year. I was really, I'm sure it annoyed Janice no end, just so hesitant. I mean, and there was resources, amazingly available in that church, and none of them would have lived like that. But I hear you. I felt that hesitation. I don't want to complain. It's not. It's good. It's nice. First house we'd ever lived in. But so I hear that. Yeah. Listen, we gotta stop because actually I've gone over a little bit. But I think your leaders now, your team leaders the facilitators are going to take some time to do a little more informal introductions and have a talk, and we're going to do that right up until lunchtime. And Andy, you'll help us know. I'm going to actually let Andy talk here.